Today's daf is daf Lamed Vav, and we're up to Ki Hahi, about, let's see how many lines down, 7 lines down. So we have now a shita that if you know there you took a neder al das rabim, then even though ein lo hafara, as a general rule, you can't be mefer a neder al das rabim, but the exception is litzorach mitzvah. And the Gemara now illustrates this with a story. Yahu, like the story of a mikri dardaki, he was teaching children, the adre Rav Acha al das rabim. What happened was that he was misbehaving. He was apparently, shall we say, guilty of child abuse. Now, it's a little bit hard to believe here, but Rashi seems to take this very far, that he was literally hitting the children. And the Gemara in Bechoros on Daf Mem Vav seems to be interpreted by Rashi as as if he literally endangered the lives of some of his children, of his pupils, by hitting them. Of course, today he would be locked up for life for that. But in any event, Rav Acha imposed a neder al das rabim that he should not teach. And why? Because Davi Pasha Biyunoki, that he was hitting the children in a very harsh way. And that's a pshia, and it's gorem nezek, and so forth. But then Ahadri Ravina, I guess in a later time, Ravina realized that we can't do without this Malamed. We need him desperately, and therefore he was mata the neder. Delosh takach dedaike kavase. There was no Malamed that could be medayek the way he was. You know, you have to teach the children how to read properly, especially when it comes to mikra, which is the subject for dardaki, for young children. And even though Rav Acha was madir, this malamed al das rabim, nevertheless, Ravina was able to be mata the neder because it was litzorach mitzvah. Okay, so that really is the last piece that concludes yesterday's daf. And now we start today's daf. The Mishnah says, "Va'edim chosmel aget mipnei tikun olam." There was a takana that the Edim should sign the get. So the Gemara doesn't understand what's going on over here. What do you mean mipnei tikuna olam? Da'oraisahu. The Gemara now is assuming, like Rabbi Meir, that Edei chasima karse, which means that the Edim, when they sign the get, they create the get. And with regard to Edei chasima, the Torah tells us in Yirmiyahu, in Tanakh, that in the case where they were writing a shtar in order to purchase a piece of property in Eretz Yisrael, it says uksov basefer v'chasom, and the word v'chasom indicates that there's got to be a chasima. Yirmiyahu Hanavi was foretelling the time that Klal Yisrael would go out to Golus, to be exiled from Eretz Yisrael into Bavel, and then in the future afterwards, when they came back, when they would return to Eretz Yisrael, then they would buy fields, they would buy sados, and he instructed them, mandated them to write shtaros and to be machtim edim. And from this, we're going to derive the conclusion that every shtar, even a get, requires chasimas edim. Now, we're going here a step further than Rabbi Meir. Why? Rabbi Meir is only talking about preparing the get, so that now with the nesin of the get liad ha'isha, she'll be megureshes. So for that we need Edei chasima. But we're going a step further. We're saying that there's an additional purpose and dimension to chasimas ha'edim, and this may add many, many new dinim, and that is uksov ba'sefer v'chasom, so that the shtar the get could now be utilized and serve another additional function above and beyond Sefer Krisus. It's also got to be what's called a shtar raya. It's got to be proof in the hands of the Isha that she received the get and received it kedasu kedin from the Yad Habal. And Sodas Bakesav Yiknu, Viksov Basefer V'chasom, is going to provide us with a proof that we purchased the land. So it's not just to effectuate the kinyan on the land as a shtar kinyan, but also to serve as a shtar raya. And that's called Laman Yamdu Yomim Rabin. And therefore, let's say, for example, if the shtar was written on a ksav sheyochel izdayef, like near machuk and so forth and so on, it's going to be possible because it's not uksov vasefer v'chasom. Now the Gemara is questioning, why does the Mishnah formulate the chasimas ha'edim al ashtar as a tikkun olam, as if it was a rabbinic requirement? This is a doraisa requirement. And on one level, it's doraisa because of sefer krisus, the chasima is critical, according to Rabbi Meir. But beyond that, it's doraisa in the sense that it's got to serve as a shtar raya. Uksov v'sefer chasom. Amar Rabbi lo tzricha leRabbi Elazar, the Omar Ede Mesira Karse, the takana of Rabbi Gamliel in our Mishnah, that the Edom should sign the get is a reflection of the Shita of Rabbi Elazar that Ede Mesira Karse, not according to Rabbi Meir. And according to Rabbi Elazar, Ede Mesira Karse means that the Ede Mesira create the get, and therefore there's no requirement of chasima in the get. But the takana of Rabbi Gamliel established that what would be the advantage of adding the chasimos to the get, even though on a doraisa level there's no requirement whatsoever according to Rabbi Elazar and Edi chasima, the zimnin, the maisi sahadi, inami zimnin the azlim dinas hayam. What happens if the Ede Masira are no longer, or they're inaccessible? We need someone to testify that she is a grusha, that the get was delivered. And for that, we rely on Ede Chasima. And many of the Achronim derive from this conclusion, that from this Gemara, the conclusion that Rabbi Elazar holds Af Ede Mesira Karsi. In other words, he doesn't deny the sheet of Rabbi Meir that Ede Chasima Karsi. He only added to Rabbi Meir Ede Mesira. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar, like Rabbi Meir, would recognize the validity and the edus through the chasima that's established as a result of the chasima sashtar. Rav Yosef Amar afilu tema l'Rab Meir. Even Rab Meir would agree that there's room for takonas chachamim in chasima ha'edim. So it means that before the takana of Rabbi Gamliel, the Eda would sign the get, but they didn't have to sign with their name. What does that mean? All they had to sign was Ani Ploni. The word Ploni means, some anonymous person. Chasamti Eid. And then if we could be Makayim that Chasima by, let's say, comparing it to another shtar which has the same identical Chasima, that's a Kiyum shtar. But his Kinu, now Rabbi Gamliel jumps in and he makes the takonishu edim mefarshim shmo seinim begittin. It's not enough that he writes Ploni; he's got to write Ani Ruvain chasamti eid mipnei tikun olam kidasanya, as we learned in the Brayso. So Rishona, before the takana of Rabbi Gamliel, by Yakosev, all he signed was Ani Ploni chasamti eid. And if the nitba, let's say the lova, would say that this is a shtar mezuyaf and it's counterfeit, then we would have to compare this shtar to another shtar that has the same chasima and has a kiyum on it. Kiyum meaning that the edim themselves came into Beis Din to testify these are our signatures. Im ksav yado yokid makom acher kosher im lav posel. But let's say we can't find another shtar with the same chasima, then the shtar would be posel. And therefore, Rav Gamliel stood up, and Takana Gedolas Kinu, he made a great Takana Shiu Mefarshim Shmosei Gittin, that he would write not just Ploni, but rather Ruvain. And then Bezdin knows how to identify the aid and how to bring that aid into Bezdin in order to testify and confirm that this is his signature when they tikkun olam. So now it's easy to be Mekayim the shtar. You don't have to find another shtar that has this same signature and compare signatures. All you have to do is bringing this aid into Bezdin. Or perhaps you could send out a call that so-and-so Ruvain signed the get. Does anybody know here in town how to recognize Ruvain's signature and authenticate it? So therefore, even according to Rabbi Meir, there's room for the takana. Midoraisa chasima karsi means a chasim of ploni, and midrabanan, based on takana Rav Gamliel, you need a chasim of Ruvain, not just ploni. The Gemara asks, do you really have to have, in order for the Edom to sign, the names of the Edom written in the get of a simani lo? What about simanim? Everybody, as we'll soon, the great Amoraim had their own identifiable, unique seal. Harav, Sire Kavra. Rav had a picture of a fish, or maybe he scribbled a picture of the fish, because Ein Ayin Harosh Letis Bedogim. Rabbi Chanina Sire Charusa, he used to sign with by making a picture of an anaf shel dekel. Because with regard to the dekel tree, the Torah says Tzadik HaTomer Yifrach. Or the way the Yavitz has it, it's a remez that he had a shevet, and they used to use the branch of a date tree to beat up those who were not behaving properly. Or, for example, Rav Chizda, Samech. Samech means Lashon L'smoke, reliable. That was his os and his simon in his signature. Yesh L'smoke al Chasim Azu Rav Hoshaya Ayin. The ayin, a little drawing of an ayin, was indicative of the ayin tova, or alternatively, shesames eno al mashe kosev b'shtar. As I read the shtar, and Rabbi Barhuna Tzir Makusa. This is the mast of a ship, and that indicates that he's the captain of the ship. He's the manig ha'olam. So Gemara says, Shani Rabbana de Bekiyan Simanayu, the Simonim of the greats were well known and identifiable, but not the run-of-the-mill rank-and-file citizen. So he had to write his own name. Otherwise, we couldn't identify him. We didn't know, nobody knew what his Simon was. And there's a story, by the way, about the father of the Chidah. I think his name was Rabbi Avram. Anyway, he had a signature that looked like a ship because he was on his way to Eretz Yisrael, and the ship was capsized, and it was a great miracle that he saved him. So he wanted to have a zikaron to the miracle. Anyway, the Gemara asks me, how did they publicize that this was his chasima? In other words, okay, fine, Rav had a tzir of a dag, but how did it become public knowledge? And the Gemara answers, b'diski. Diski means that when they, let's take the example of Rav. Let's say Rav would have to write a letter, either to be Doresh Shlom Re'eru, Stam, a friendly letter, or he answered a tshuva to a question. Then the letters became almost public knowledge. Today, by the way, as you know, they sell letters that are written by Gdolim. If you have a letter that's written by somebody who is a Gadol, you can sell it for, I don't know, maybe $100, and if it's rare, maybe a couple of $1,000. Okay, now we go on to the main sugya for today, and that's prosbol. Hillel, the Mishnah tells us, Hiskin prosbol, mipnei tikkun olam. So just by way of introduction, every 7 years, the Torah has a Shemitah year, which has two dimensions. One is Shemitah with regard to the Karka, and the other is Shemitah with regard to Ksafin. And if, let's say, Shimon had borrowed money from Ruvain before the Shemitah year, then comes Shemitah, and it is Shmot. It breaks up the Chov, and therefore Ruvain cannot collect the Chov from Shimon. Came along Hillel, and he established a prose bull. A prose bull, we'll see exactly how it operates, allows Ruvain to collect the Chov from Shimon even past the Shemitah year. Now we're going to look at a Mishnah in Masechet Shavuos in the 10th Perek, Tanan Hasam, prose bull Eino Mishamet. What does it mean? Normally, the Torah requires Shmot, that the Malva has to lift up his hands and he cannot demand payment for a chov from the Lova when Shemitah comes around. But prose bull, as a result of prose bull that was established by Hillel, Eino Mishamit, the chov is still active. Masechet min advarim shehiskin Hillel hazaken shara. What brought Hillel hazaken to establish this takana to allow the malva to collect the chov? It came to the point where people did not want to lend money. Who wants to lend money knowing that the Shemitah is going to come and break up the chov and he loses his money? And in addition to the fact that the lover, those who need money, will not be able to get money, there's also a violation, because whenever the Torah says the word hishamer, it's a lav, and the Torah says hishamer l'cha pen yeh davar im levavcha blial. What would a person blial, who has a rotten heart, he would say, karva shnasa sheva shnasa shmita, and he doesn't want to lend money. He sees that in a year from now there'll be shmita. Omad. So that Hillel, to address this problem, hiskin prose bull. What is a prose bull? The malva gives his shtar, which is a shtar milva, into the hands of Bezdin, and now Bezdin will collect his chov. It's almost as if Bezdin takes over the chov, and therefore it circumvents the law of Shemitah. This is what you'd call a kind of harama, but it's harama that was instituted by Hillel and formalized because we want to avoid the violation of Hishamer L'cha. B'zeu gufo shel prose bull. What is the exact text of the prose bull? The Malva writes, Mosrani lachem, I hereby, Ploni uploni, I mentioned my name, give over my shtari chov to the dayanim shebemakom ploni, to the dayanim in such a place, and I'm allowing them shekol chov sheyesh li etzel ploni, any debt that's owed by me by so and so, shadvenu kol zman sheretz, that I'm allowed to collect it even after the Shemitah. V'adayanim chos milamata. We have the chasima on the bottom of the shtar prose bowl. O Edim, or you can get any two Edim to sign the prose bowl. So the Gemara says, "Umika midi to be the Raisa Meshamta Shvius, the Hiskin Hill the Lo Meshamta." How could it be that the Torah says that the Chov is not in existence anymore? The Shemitah year comes along and it's Meshamit Chov, and now Hill could say, "Well, you know what? He can still collect the Chov because we're going to do it in this way by handing over the shtar to Bezdin." How could that be? You're really, in effect, taking money out of the hands of the lover, giving it over to the malva against the law of the Torah. Amar Abaye b'shvius b'zman hazeh v'rebi. That Hill's takana only applies to shvius b'zman hazeh, which means that shvius with the loss of Eretz Yisrael, meaning the golus and the exile, shvius is no longer valid on a doraisa level, but the Rabbanan, bizman hazeh, even after the termination of Shvius on a doraisa level, they instituted Shvius derabbanan. So Hillel now could apply the principle of Heim Amru v'Heim Amru. No, the Rabbanan were the ones who now, bizman hazeh, after the exile, would institute Shvius, and at the same time, they would institute a method of circumventing the law of Shvius. because it's all D'Rabbanan, they could do so. And all this was after the Churban Bayis Sheni, when there's no longer Yovel min HaTorah, and there's no longer Shvius min HaTorah, because Shvius depends upon Yovel. So when the Shiftei Yisrael were exiled from the land, there's no Yovel and there's no Shemitah. It's all D'Rabbanan, even though it's a little bit strange because Hillel actually was alive during the period of Bayis Sheni. And he died before the Churban Bayis Sheni, but I guess he was already anticipating the situation of post-Churban. The Sanya, as we learned in the Brisa, Rebbe Omer, it says in the Torah, Vized V'Hashmita Shamot. Now, the word Shemitah here appears twice in this pasuk. It says Dvar Hashmita, and then it says Shamot. So why do we need two? B'shtei Shmitos HaKos V'davar Achas Shmitas Karka V'Achas Shmitas Ksofim. So we see clearly that according to Rebbe, the Torah itself mandates Shvius Mishametes Es HaChovos. And that's in addition to Shmitas Karka. So that everybody is obligated in Shmitas Karka and everyone is obligated in Shmitas Ksofim. That's what's called a Chovas HaGuf. Because in the case of Shmitas Karka, we have an Isur of Avodas Karka, and that's a Chovas Karka. But in the case of Shmitas Ksofim, it's purely 100% a Chovas HaGuf. Nevertheless, Bisman Shatom Mishamed Karka, when there's an Isur of Avodas Karka, Min HaTorah, Atom Mishamed Ksofim. Our Bisman Sheyatom Mishamed Karka, when there's no law of Shvius Min HaTorah, because we're after the Churban and Batla Kedusha Eretz in Shvius, at that point, Iyatom Mishamed Ksofim, Min HaTorah, the law of Shvius is not active to be Mishamed Chovos. So that's all on a D'Oraisa level.